Hey kids, want to learn how to make yourselves into perfect little targets, just like a shooting range if an armed psychopath ever attacks your school?
Yeah!
Well then, just follow along with me as I take you through the magical world of common lockdown procedures used by elementary schools, high schools, colleges, and universities. Let's go! Okay, so that was a little, really morbid. But the unfortunate fact is that it's true. And if these active shooter incidents keep happening at schools, and nothing is done to change the lockdown procedures and the training that we're giving today's students, the death tolls in these attacks are just never going to drop. Pop quiz, folks. Who can name 3 advantages that a firearm gives you in a conflict? No one? Well, it's really quite simple. The 3 main advantages afforded to a gun-toting attacker are the ability to engage targets at a distance, the ability to dominate your target's psychological state, and the ability to gravely wound or kill multiple targets in a very short period of time.
But mister, that just sounds like a list of reasons to get rid of guns entirely. They sound scary.
Well, some people will take that argument, but a gun, like anything else, is only as dangerous as the person wielding it. Police officers carry guns, don't they? And they enforce the law. Soldiers carry guns, and they go after the terrible people who want to hurt us in our way of life.
Well, I guess that makes sense.
Don't worry, I've only mentioned these things to help you understand how best to defend yourself if you're ever at school and a bad person with a gun tries to hurt you or your classmates. Okay, enough of the patronizing dribble. I think I've made my point here. What I'm about to do is illustrate why the current procedure for an active shooter inside a school building is completely inadequate and likely to result in more deaths rather than fewer. For starters, let's take the example of the Durham District School Board from Ontario, Canada. I know some folks out that way, and in doing my research for this video, they steered me to the following document as released by their regional school board. So, as you can clearly read here, or at the actual PDF file, the link to which will be in the low bar, the procedure for responding to the threat inside a school property is as follows. Call 911, initiate announcement of lockdown, close and lock all classroom doors, restrict the movement of any and all students, staff, and administration, blackout classrooms. Now, these rules apply primarily to the school administration. Calling 911, initiating the lockdown announcement, these are all things the staff are responsible for. The second section is where the behavior of the students is directed, and where I take issue with the procedure. I'm going to take my grievances point by point here, so forgive me if this takes a while, but I'm trying to explain, in as definitive a way as possible, how this procedure endangers people caught in these terrible situations and manufactures victims. Okay, first up we have staying away from doors and windows. This doesn't seem like terrible advice if there's an active shooter on campus, and to be honest, it's not entirely flawed. Staying away from windows that face the exterior of the building would be a good call if the shooter is on the premises but not inside the building itself, but that's not the situation being covered by this section. For a threat inside the school, you're mainly concerned with the door or doors that lead into the classroom. The reason I'm so opposed to the whole put as much distance between you and the shooter concept is containing the first of the 3 advantages provided to an assailant by a firearm. The benefit of being able to maintain lethality at a distance. The further you are from the attacker, the more distance you need to close before you can effectively engage them with any hope of neutralizing them. I get that if you put a lot of distance between you and them, the bullet's going to slow down and not be able to hit you. But you're in a classroom, let's not argue semantics, that's not the point we're going after here. Next we have turning off the lights and closing the blinds. Again, we have something that seems helpful, but in reality can serve to make law enforcement's job that much harder. Turning off the lights under normal circumstances might lead an intruder to believe that no one is in the room. But the procedure of blacking out classrooms involves putting a piece of paper in the small, inlaid door window. If that piece of paper is there or any kind of blockage, then the intruder knows that room is, indeed, occupied, and that means there are targets inside. Second, you have the closing of the blinds, which, in the event of an exterior threat, may help prevent them from firing into the room. but if the assailant is in the school and a police sharpshooter needs to take the kill shot to save hostages, those blinds being down can neutralize the police sniper's effectiveness. The third point just instructs staff and students to be aware of sightlines, something that I think would be much better advice if paired with an aggressive method of defense rather than a submissive one. No huge issue here though, so let's move on. Just be sure to keep this one in mind for later. Stay away from doors and windows. Apparently this part is really important because the geniuses creating this emergency procedure document decided to include it twice. Next. If there is a window in the classroom, consider a cover for the window if it is safe to do so. This one's a catch-22 as previously mentioned because if you cover the window, the intruder knows that there are people in that room. If you don't cover the window, however, the intruder can just look through it to see if there's anyone in the room. Personally, if you're going to leave it uncovered, you need to shelter everyone in the room out of the sight from the door's windows and leave the door locked with the lights off. That's leave the door locked with the lights off. This gives your classroom the most believable unoccupied appearance. Fifth on the docket, we have taking cover if it is available. The document advises that you position yourself behind something solid, presumably something that could stop a bullet or bullets if the shooter decided to just randomly fire through the door's window and into the classroom. And I'll admit, this isn't terrible advice, again, if the intruder cannot breach the door and gain entry into the classroom. If they do get in, however, you may have just given yourself another obstacle to overcome in the event that you need to fight for your life. Remain absolutely quiet. A solid 6 point, no objections here. If your goal is to avoid detection, shutting up and staying that way until a threat is passed is some solid tactical advice. Eighth is having teachers take attendance, presumably to figure out where everyone is as quickly as possible after the end of the emergency. No problems here either. If the police need to go looking for someone or, God forbid, identifying a victim in a bomb attack, knowing who is and isn't accounted for can help. The final point is that under no circumstances, unless absolutely necessary to communicate with law enforcement and emergency personnel regarding the incident, are cell phones to be used, and when not in use, they should be turned off or set to vibrate or silent notification mode. This one has to do with limiting the amount of traffic that 911 operators have to deal with, stopping the spread of false information from panicked students, and to prevent a student from inadvertently triggering or possibly even intentionally triggering a remote cell phone activated explosive device. Again, this is another point with which I have no particular objection. It's just a matter of making law enforcement's job easier and preventing more damage through remote explosives or public panic. Okay, so I've outlined this particular school district's procedures, and from my experiences and the information that I can gather, this seems to be standard operating procedure for schools across Ontario, if not across all of Canada. The only problem with this plan structure, it sets up a near perfect killing ground for an active shooter. What this plan does, through steps like putting distance between yourself and the classroom door or doors, putting covers up over the windows, and closing the blinds in your classroom, is effectively give the shooter the advantage of distance when confronting students and staff, information to know which rooms have occupants and which do not, and protection against law enforcement intervention by denying them a clear sightline into the classroom, which, if you consider things a bit, runs contrary to Step 3's be aware of sightlines. Yeah, Viper, you've given us all of your complaints, but no solutions. I get that, it's a fair point. So far all I've done is point out the problems inherent in the system, but I can't very well start solving problems that haven't been brought to light now, can I? So we're operating on the information that we've already established, being that a shooter is the one with the advantage at a distance, that they can dominate their target psychologically, and that they have the capacity to inflict serious harm or death very quickly as an individual compared to any individual who is unarmed. This means that if we are looking to survive such a situation, that we need to mitigate or eliminate any and all advantages that the shooter has and capitalize on our own strengths and assets in the situation. Are you with me so far? Okay, then let's lay out my proposal for how an active shooter in a school situation ought to be dealt with by staff and students. Step 1. Prepare your mind. An active shooter is something that no one expects they will ever have to actually deal with in their lives, or at least hopes they won't have to deal with. If you're not carrying a firearm, like the majority of students, you're going to need to pick an alternative method of self-defense, because sheltering in place and just hoping that the shooter doesn't decide that it's your day to die isn't good enough. As I mentioned before, an intruder with a firearm can psychologically defeat the unprepared before they even engage in physical conflict. So, try to avoid sinking into the mindset of the victim and switch rather to the mindset of the adamant defender. Just because they have a gun doesn't mean that you don't have a chance, and to give up without fighting only ensures that you'll lose. And in this situation, you cannot afford to lose. Step 2. Get organized. Your greatest advantage is that you have superior numbers, and you absolutely have to remember this. Yes, a person with a gun, as mentioned before, has the capacity to inflict a great deal of harm if given the time and space to do so, which means you will need to use the advantage you do have to neutralize that threat. Now, in low voices, talk to your teacher and the classmates and figure out who's a fighter and who's not. There are only a couple kinds of people in this situation. There are the people who will fight, the people who will run, and the people who will submit. You need to figure out who's who. Not everyone will have the strength of will to engage the threat head on, but some will, and you'll need to figure out who those people are and get all of them on the same page ASAP. Step 3. Arm yourselves. I know this seems crazy, trying to arm yourself with objects commonly found in a school, but it's not impossible, and might be your only chance at survival. Depending on which class you're in, you may have access to shop tools like hammers, wrenches, or refuse items like a scrap metal bar or lengths of timber. If you're not in a tech class, then perhaps you're in a home ec classroom with access to kitchen knives. Even the school's biology labs are likely to have scalpels, and your average classroom supply closet is probably going to have a broom. Literally anything you can use to augment your own ability to inflict harm on another individual needs to be considered, but do it quickly. Step 4. Defend yourselves. Some of the most commonly used weapons in mass shootings are handguns, but you may also encounter an assailant wielding a rifle or shotgun. If you're going to need to confront a threat, given the shooter is able to enter the classroom, it's going to be necessary to put as much material between your fighters and the shooter as physically possible. A couple of very common ammunition types that are likely to be encountered are the 9mm pistol cartridge, the 5.56 NATO rifle round, and of course, the common hunter's 12-gauge buckshot shell. You may be asking what you could possibly do to defend yourself against someone with a gun when all you have are school supplies, right? Well, I'm right there with you. It seems outlandish, but before you give yourself up for dead, consider that a 9mm round will only reliably penetrate up to about 7 inches of phone book paper, that a 5.56 NATO rifle round will make it through about 8 inches, and a 12-gauge buckshot load carries even less penetrating power than either the 9mm or the 5.56 NATO. So, if you have a bunch of textbooks, it would not be unreasonable to say that, even with paperback books, if you can put 10 inches of paper or more between you and the shooter, that you stand a very good chance of absorbing the first, possibly second and third shots fired at you, should a confrontation become inevitable. From your group of people who are willing to fight back against the shooter in the event given that your classroom is breached, give a backpack or backpacks if you have more than one individual full of textbooks to the people willing to be the first ones to rush the shooter. This may buy them the time they need to close with the shooter and allow the group to wrestle them to the ground. It's extremely important, again, that you buy yourself time and distance to take both of those things away from the shooter. Step 5. Position yourselves. You need to make sure that, if the shooter breaches the door to your classroom, that whoever is willing to confront the shooter is in a position that provides your assailant with the least amount of space between them and your textbook shielded defenders, but also so that the people confronting the shooter will not be immediately visible if they are able to look into the classroom. Positioning yourselves immediately on the other side of the classroom door is not advisable, as you may be hit by bullets shot through the door as the shooter attempts to gain entry. Being offset from the door, preferably directly along the main hallway wall, as these are often made of concrete or brick, would be the best position to maintain proximity to the door without putting yourselves in danger of rounds fired through it. Step 6. Steel yourselves. No one said that this was going to be easy, and no one's going to guarantee that you'll make it out of this situation alive. I'm sorry. However, if you work together, pool your resources, and commit to fighting rather than just submitting, you have a much better chance of not only saving your own lives, the lives of your classmates, and everyone else in the school. Step 7. Take action. If the shooter breaches your room, you need to act. Even the Department of Homeland Security in the United States advises anyone in an active shooter scenario, quote, if your life is in immediate danger, take action against the shooter by acting as aggressively as possible against him or her, throwing items and improvising weapons, yelling and committing to your actions, end quote. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot sit idly by at this point, as the shooter is now in your classroom, in your boardroom, in your office, whatever it may be. They are in a position to kill you, to kill your classmates, to kill your teacher, and other people in the school if you do not act and stop them there. My advice here will not be popular. I know this from experience when I spoke to my high school about how ineffective their plan was likely to be. I spoke privately with the few friends that I had in each class, and even privately with some of my teachers after one particular lockdown regarding my concerns about the procedure, and letting them know that I would not be willing to just sit in a corner as an active shooter executed us from across the room. All but one of them agreed with me, and the one objector simply seemed to be towing the school board line. Folks, in an active shooter situation, giving up, rolling over, and accepting death simply isn't acceptable. And if the law doesn't allow you to carry a firearm or other weapon at your campus, you're going to need to improvise when all else fails. The worst part about the standard procedure for an active shooter in schools? That so few account for times at which the shooter is likely to cause the most damage, depending on the type of shooter you're dealing with. But that's something for another video entirely. A final point that I need to mention, purely to cover my own ass I suppose, is that I am by no means an expert on active shooter scenarios. I'm not law enforcement, I'm not military. I'm just someone who has the capacity to do ample amounts of research into this topic and who has spent a considerable amount of time conducting amateur research into active shooters and how to defend oneself. Also, who has experienced more than a couple of lockdowns in their schools from both drills and legitimate threats. Nothing I say here should be considered expert advice. Rather, I simply hope to inspire those who watch this video to do research of their own and question the procedures handed down to them by their schools and workplaces. Remember, your life is not worth following the rules. Again, folks, remember this. Failing to plan is just planning to fail. And when your life is on the line, failure is not an option. Well, here we are at the end of another video, and no better off for the experience. If you managed to make it this far, I'd invite you to check out the rest of the videos on my channel, organized into topic-based playlists to make your viewing that much easier if you have a particular preference. If you've enjoyed this video, or even if you didn't, I'd encourage you to leave an up or down vote along with a comment regarding what it is you liked or disliked about the video. I'm always appreciative of constructive criticism. Oh, and if you just want to troll and shitpost, totally cool as well. And finally, in the really off chance that you'd like to be notified whenever I come out with new videos, click on that big old red subscribe button in the low bar. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.